Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Sermon with Hyde Park United Methodist Church in Tampa, Florida. I'm Matt Hotho, the Director of Production and Online Engagement.
And I'm Magrey Vega, the Senior Pastor.
All right, Magrey, so we kicked off a brand new series this week called Holy Struggle. Yeah. I'm really excited for it.
I can tell.
I know. I've got an Easter egg, actually, that I'm going to bring next week to our Beyond the Sermon. So if you're watching, you'll definitely get to enjoy it quite a bit. But I think this Jacob and Esau story, some of us know it all too well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very good.
It is a story that's found in the book of Genesis. It's one of the first ones you encounter when you're like reading through the Bible.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So let's get right into it. This idea of, you said at the beginning, you can know somebody by their positive traits and their negative traits.
Right.
We see that all throughout Scripture.
Right.
The Israelites preserved both the good and the bad of their heroes.
Right.
You talked about what that can teach us today.
Mm-hmm.
Unpack that a little bit in Jacob's story and then reflect on, what that can teach us today.
Well, as I was writing this sermon and preparing for this series, I still had the soundtrack of the previous series that we just finished in my head.
Mm-hmm.
That just as we have been reflecting on our founders and our heritage and our legacy, and learning from American history, both the virtues and the flaws and imperfections within our own history, now we're jumping into the heritage and the legacy of our spiritual ancestry. So that same sort of bifocal lens can also apply, especially, as you said, when it comes to depictions of biblical characters.
Yeah.
You said it a couple of weeks ago in another Beyond the Sermon, that one of the incredible aspects of the Bible is its unvarnished portrayals of its characters.
Yeah.
I mean, as I thought about it, with the exception of Jesus and maybe Joseph in Genesis, and maybe a few others that I'm not thinking of, like, everybody is imperfect. Mm-hmm. They have their virtues, they have their imperfections, including and especially the very person after whom the Israelites are named.
Right.
So right from the beginning, Jacob and Esau just shows not just the conflict between two persons, which is eventually where my sermon goes, interpersonal relationships, but the inner conflict within a single person, the virtues and the vices that are constantly at odds within oneself.
Yeah, I mean, it is true. Like you riffed on Taylor Swift's song "Antihero," right? It's me, hi, I'm the problem, it's
Sure
me.
did. Yeah.
But I think there's something true there.
Absolutely, there is.
It's like there is within all of us this tension between our best desires and the things that just pull us away from those best desires.
Absolutely.
And the Bible is true and honest about those, right? It could whitewash that history.
Right.
And make the person to be perfect.
That's right.
When I think about Jacob too, his name is part of that refrain.
Mm-hmm.
Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Right?
Three of them.
I used to just, in my head, I always abbreviated just AIJ. It comes up all the time in the Old Testament. It's just a refrain.
That's right.
The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Absolutely.
And he's one of these big three.
Yes.
And he's imperfect, right?
Absolutely. In fact, all three of them are.
Right, exactly. And so this history is understood as something that is not meant to be understood as perfect.
And it's a reminder that when we're looking at history of any kind, the temptation would be to, as you said, whitewash the history, to espouse only the virtues of those parts of our past that we want to celebrate. It is just as important to be crystal clear and unvarnished about the flaws within our history, including the flaws within our individual pasts.
Yeah. So then there's some people sometimes who will come across stuff like this in the Bible and go, what am I supposed to do with this, right? How do I read this, especially if you're reading it literally?
Yeah.
It's tough to deal with. So what would you tell somebody who's going through that besides like, you need to calm down?
Are we just going to keep doing this Taylor Swift thing?
I don't know what you're talking about.
That's just amazing. You're like the mastermind of all these things. So
there it is.
Okay. So
it's like an invisible string connecting.
Wow. All of this stays in or none of it stays in. So it goes to the whole idea of how you discern genres in the Bible. Mm-hmm. Like if you're looking at this as strict history, sort of a literal factual depiction of people who actually lived, there's no other extra biblical material that talks about the historicity of these characters, which doesn't mean that they didn't exist, but it does mean that the Bible includes them to speak of a different kind of truth that is just as valid, which is the truthfulness of the human condition and the truthfulness of God's grace. So you read a story like Jacob, and it is very valid to say, how is the condition of Jacob alive and well today in the world, in my community, in my relationships, and most especially in me? How do I have both the virtues and the vices of Jacob? Who is my Esau? What influences in my past are like Isaac and Rebekah? What kind of parental roles shaped who I am that I am now needing to navigate, both the goods and the bads? What are the kinds of sibling rivalries do I have in my life? Not maybe literal sibling rivalries.
Right, exactly.
But what kinds of competitiveness shows up in my interactions with others? So it's those kinds of words of truth that are timeless in the Bible.
That's right. You look at these stories and you see yourself in them.
Absolutely.
It's those things that we have all gone through.
Right.
So then as you were kind of wrapping the sermon, you went to this idea of this story that comes up later where Jacob and Esau meet, right? And they have to reconcile through this whole experience. And Jacob is expecting to go to war with Esau. He comes prepared with a peace offering. I mean, sometimes when I read those stories too, I have to... Sometimes it leaps off the page to me just how ancient these stories are.
True.
Right? Like we really think about, wow, he walked up with like 400 camels and we just picture it on like a felt board or something like that. But the reality is, right, like assuming these are somewhat true stories that happened at some point, right? Like this is a caravan of people coming.
Totally.
And the idea is here's my gift to you to make up for this wrong that I've done to you.
Right. Well, and so this is a literary device that the author or the storyteller of this story sets us up to think will lead to some big climactic battle. So I think that's what the numbers mean. There's herds and herds and herds of animals.
Right.
And there's 400 thugs that are being amassed on the other side. And so in a sort of a literary rhetorical sort of fashion, you're being set up to believe that this story is going to zig, not expecting God to zag. In some ways, it comes full circle from where Jacob and Esau began their story. Like in the womb, there is a mounting kind of struggle even within the womb. It didn't involve animals and thugs, but it was two people wrestling in the womb. And even God says in the prophecy, these are two nations. I mean, that's the heightened, elevated tension that from start to finish, Jacob and Esau are just engaged in. And then the zag, the surprise, the twist is not conflict. It's not bloodshed, which is what has marked their whole relationship. It is forgiveness and it is reconciliation. But then there's still one more zag to go. I mean, there's still one more twist, because just when you expect Jacob and Esau to go live together and occupy the same land and build a whole new life together, there's a surprise. They decide, even after that reconciliation, to part ways and never see each other again. I mean, they're literally going to start two gigantic nations that, at least in the original hearing of the story, were still in existence today. The Israelites and the Edomites. And those two nations were always at war. So reconciliation, as I said in the sermon, does not always mean going back to the way things were before, but it at least means a season where you stop hating each other.
So I think there's two different ways we can approach the story. I'd love for you to enter into it from the pastoral kind of, what does this mean for us, right? Like I've heard Rob Bell once said, like, reconciliation can still come with a restraining order. Like he was just honest about it, right?
Good.
And I love that way of thinking about it. Is like the Christian idea of reconciliation does not mean that we are now friends and everything is a-okay.
Right. It means that God often takes the long view of what reconciliation means. When we think about forgiveness, when we think about reconciliation, we have recency bias. And by that I mean we think that the way that reconciliation needs to happen is to go back to the way things were before. When in fact reconciliation could be the introduction of something new, a new kind of being in relationship with each other that still feels unsettled and tenuous because all we know is what we knew before the conflict. But it could set the stage for a different kind of healing with a longer impact in the world. There is no way that Jacob and Esau could have possibly known that act of reconciliation, though it meant their parting of ways, meant the preservation of the messianic line that would eventually lead to the Messiah. And that in some ways, as you track through the story of the Edomites, you and I were discovering this the other day, that the Edomites played a pretty significant role in the ongoing story of the Israelites. There's no way that Jacob and Esau could have known the unfolding of centuries of stories to come that moment of embrace would have sparked.
Yeah.
So reconciliation is the simple planting of a seed into some long-term healing that we may not see fully realized in our lifetimes.
That's a really helpful way, I think, to think about how to read this text and apply it.
Absolutely.
There's another angle to this text that I find fascinating, and is a bit more of the training that I got in seminary, which is a bit more academic, and that's to think of what's happening a lot in Genesis with the characters as almost table setting.
Yeah.
If you were setting a table for a board game of like Risk or something like that.
Great.
So Esau represents Edom, and Jacob represents Israel. And all throughout the Old Testament, these two nations are going to be fighting each other. And whether or not these were two actual real people who existed or were sort of historical patriarchs that were sort of just to represent the idea that, okay, we personified these nations.
Yeah.
This is why they've always struggled, right? Is Edom is the older nation, it's been around for a while.
Right.
Israel is the younger nation. They've always been at war with each other.
Right.
At some point, there was a moment of reconciliation, and if they could just kind of remember that at one point, we did get along.
That's right.
And so I think there's just this interesting way too to read these ancient texts as table setting for other things that you read in the Old Testament.
I love that. So in a couple of weeks, we're going to be talking about my favorite story involving Jacob, which is his wrestling with the angel. And there's some embedded commentary into that story where at the very end, I'll just give it away, the angel strikes Jacob in the hip, forcing him to walk with a limp for the rest of his life. And then the commentator says, this is why we don't eat the hip joint of sheep today. This is why.
This is why.
Like, wow.
This is the reason. Yeah.
So yes, literal table setting for when you're eating a sheep. You track source material for these theological ideas back to these ancient stories. That's kind of the same thing.
Well, and I think that's the beauty too of the biblical text, is it's got so many different valences that you can read it through. One other thing as we get ready to wrap, when we were doing Bible Project 2020, you and I hopped in your car. This was right before COVID, actually.
Wow.
Hopped in your car and drove over to Newport Richie to interview
Kathy Farmer, my favorite Old Testament professor in seminary. That's right.
Yes, and her dissertation was on
really
the trickster theme.
I love it.
In the Hebrew Bible.
I forgot about that.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Glad. So cool that you remembered that.
Yeah. So if you go back and listen to our Bible Project 2020 podcast, which still exists, you can find it on our website. Google Bible Project 2020. Kathy Farmer, I think it was definitely one of the first 10 episodes because by then we were in COVID.
That's true.
And we filmed that one in person with her. Oh, gosh. I brought the whole rig over there. Anyways, I share all that to say that the trickster theme in Genesis, we can't get into it in our whole kind of conversation today, but is a really interesting idea that all throughout Genesis, the idea of tricking each other is actually a thing, a tool that like writers would use in the Bible to make a story more interesting and to add nuance to characters and that kind of thing.
The original circulation of these stories was orally.
Yeah.
And so anything you could do to grab people's attention as they're listening to this story was helpful. So absolutely, that's one of the ways they did that.
Awesome. Well, as we get ready to wrap up, do you have any more Taylor Swift things you want to work in here?
I've just got to stop. No, sorry.
Okay. All right.
I'm the problem.
I was going to say it was a cruel summer, but we're coming out the other side. But anyways, yeah. Gosh, this is going to be a fun series.
Okay.
I'm going to see if I can work some other Taylor Swift stuff into it. Y'all, this is so much fun. I'm so glad you were joining us for these Beyond the Sermons, getting to see this other side of Magrey, of me, of what faith can be like too when you engage theologically with the Bible, when you engage with it historically, when you engage with it critically, things that can happen. We're going to be doing that all throughout this series as we talk about Jacob and his story. So I'm excited you're joining us. If you want to know more about our community, you can go to hydeparkumc.org/next steps. Join a small group or come join us in person for worship. I'm Matt Hotho.
And I'm Magrey de Vega.
And we'll see you next time.